My name is Olivia Doyle, and I'm 34. I was standing in the private room I had paid for, holding a plate my mother had just told me to put down. The candles were mine. The flowers were mine. The 40-year anniversary printed on the little gold cards was, in every way that mattered, mine too. My sister smiled at me the way she always did, like she was doing me a favor by letting me stand there. What happened in the 90 seconds after I set that plate down cost my family more than they ever charged me, and I never once raised my voice. Their own terms. Pull up a chair, and if a family that only sees you when they need something sounds familiar, drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. The call came on a Tuesday, the way all of my mother's requests came, wrapped in a compliment sharp enough to draw blood. "Olivia, you're so good with these things," she said. "Your father and I want a real party this year. 40 years. You'll handle it, won't you?" I said yes before I noticed I was the only one she'd asked. That was the pattern of my whole life, if I'm honest. When the water heater died, they called me. When my father's truck needed new brakes, they called me. When a cousin got married 3 states away and everyone needed hotel rooms, somehow the block of reservations landed on my credit card. I was the reliable one. That was the word they used, always with a smile, the way you'd describe a good appliance. My sister Camille was the beautiful one, the one who made things look nice in photographs. I was the one who made things actually work. I told myself there was honor in that. I told myself somebody had to be the person who could be counted on, and I was proud to be her. But there's a difference between being counted on and being counted out, and I had spent 34 years pretending I couldn't tell them apart. My mother, Sharon, never once asked if the timing worked for me. She never asked if I could afford it. She simply assumed, the way you assume the sun will come up, that Olivia would take care of it. And I always did. I hung up the phone that Tuesday and opened a new spreadsheet because that's what I do. I started a budget for a party I was throwing for people who would forget I threw it. I keep books for a living. I run a small bookkeeping practice out of a rented office above a bakery, and I am very good at it. Strangers trust me with the truth of their money, the ugly and the hopeful parts, and I balance it to the penny. There's a comfort in numbers. They don't flatter you and they don't lie. A column either adds up or it doesn't. And when it doesn't, you find the missing entry, and you make it right. I've built my whole self on that idea. Find the missing piece. Make it right. Carry the difference so the total lands where it should. What I never noticed, for years, was that I ran my family's finances the same way, except I never kept a ledger for myself. I'd cover a shortfall and call it love. I'd float a cost and call it being close. If you'd asked me how much I had spent over the past decade keeping my parents comfortable and my sister's image intact, I couldn't have told you, because I had made very sure never to add it up. A bookkeeper who won't look at one account. That was me. I could reconcile anyone's ledger but my own worth. I told myself the family books didn't need keeping, because family isn't a transaction. That's a beautiful thing to believe. It's also exactly what someone tells you right before they hand you the bill. I opened the party budget that night and started entering line items, and for the first time, a small, quiet voice in the back of my head asked a question I didn't want to hear. It asked who, in all these years, had ever entered a line item for me. Camille came to the first planning lunch 40 minutes late, which for her was practically punctual. She swept in wearing sunglasses indoors, kissed the air near my cheek, and immediately took out her phone. My sister is 38 and beautiful in the effortful way that takes 2 hours every morning. She sat down, ordered a drink I would end up paying for, and said, "So, what are we thinking? It has to look incredible." Not be incredible. Look incredible. That was always the difference between us. Her daughter Hannah, who is 12 and quiet in a way that makes adults uncomfortable, sat beside her drawing on a napkin. While I laid out the venue options and the catering estimates, Camille scrolled, half listening, occasionally saying cute or no, too cheap. Then she turned her phone around and showed me a page she had already made. A shared photo album, titled Mom and Dad's 40th, decorated with little gold hearts. It was pretty. It was also, I noticed, tagged with her name as the organizer. "I set it up so everyone can follow along," she said, glowing. "People love seeing the process." I looked at the screen and felt something cold slide into place. She hadn't booked a thing. She hadn't spent $1. But she had already put her name on the front of it, the way she always did, and my parents would see that name every time they opened their phones. Hannah looked up from her napkin and watched me not say anything. "It's great, Camille," I said, because I was the reliable one, and reliable people keep the peace. I paid for lunch on my way out. Camille had already left to catch the light for a photo of the parking lot flowers. That night, the cold feeling followed me home, and it brought a memory with it. I was 9 years old at my own birthday party. There was a sheet cake with yellow roses, and I had waited all afternoon for the corner piece, the one with the most frosting. When the plates came around, my mother took the corner piece and set it in front of Camille, who was 13 and pouting about something. I reached for a smaller slice, and my mother caught my wrist. "Don't be greedy, Olivia," she said, loud enough for the other kids to hear. "You didn't pay for that." I was 9. Of course I didn't pay for it. No 9-year-old pays for her own birthday cake. But I remember the heat in my face, the way the other children looked at me, the lesson that landed so young it stopped feeling like a lesson and started feeling like a law. Wanting things was greedy. Taking a share was taking too much. My place at the table was conditional, and the condition was that I make myself small enough to deserve it. I learned to hand Camille the corner piece before anyone had to tell me. I learned to say I wasn't hungry. I learned that the fastest way to be loved in my family was to need nothing and provide everything. 25 years later, I was booking a private room and choosing a menu, and some part of me, the 9-year-old part, still believed that if I just gave enough, one day I'd get to keep the corner piece. I know how that sounds. I know. But you don't argue with a law you learned before you could spell it. You just keep paying it, quietly, hoping the debt someday clears. But this year, I decided, would be different. I don't know exactly what got into me. Maybe it was turning 34 and realizing I'd spent every birthday of my adult life reassuring other people they hadn't forgotten mine. Maybe it was watching Hannah watch me. Whatever it was, I made a decision that felt almost dangerous. This year, I would do it right. All the way. No expense clipped. And this year, I would let myself be seen doing it. I booked the Hearthstone room at Alderwood, the nicest private dining room in town, the kind of place with real linen and a fireplace, and a manager who remembers your name. I put down a deposit that made me wince and left my card on file for the balance. I chose the menu myself, every course, the roast my father loves, and the lemon cake my mother pretends she doesn't. I ordered the flowers she likes, even though she'd never say she liked them. And somewhere in the middle of all that planning, standing in my kitchen with a calculator and a glass of wine, I let myself imagine the moment I'd wanted my whole life. My father lifting his glass. My mother's hand finding mine. Someone, anyone, saying out loud in front of the family, "Olivia did all of this. Thank you, Olivia." That was the whole fantasy. Not applause, not repayment. Just to be named. I told myself this time they'd notice. I even bought a dress. I hadn't bought myself something beautiful in years, and I stood in the store holding it, feeling foolish and hopeful at the same time. I'll tell you about the dress later. For now, just know that I planned that party like a woman finally setting a place for herself. The trouble with letting yourself hope is that other people can smell it. Within a week, Camille had appointed herself co-host, which meant she made decisions and I absorbed the cost of them. She got into the guest list first. I'd built it carefully, close family and my parents' oldest friends, a warm room of people who actually knew them. Camille added a dozen names I didn't recognize, women from her circle with good hair and better handbags, people who would photograph well and mean nothing to my father. "It'll look fuller," she explained, as if a party for my parents' marriage was a stage set that needed extras. Each new guest was another plate, another glass, another line on the invoice with my name at the bottom. I mentioned gently that the room had a capacity. Camille waved it away. Alderwood will squeeze us in. They love me there. They did not love her there. She had never been. But I didn't say that. What I noticed instead was my mother's reaction when Camille reported the expanded list. "Oh, that's wonderful," Sharon said, beaming at Camille. "You always think of everything." "You always think of everything," said to the woman who had added names to a party she wasn't paying for, in front of the woman who had booked the room, chosen the food, and covered the deposit. I stood there holding the actual list, the real one, the one with the real work on it, and I watched my mother hand the credit to the daughter who had done nothing but make it more expensive. I said nothing. I was getting very, very good at saying nothing, and every time I swallowed it, the swallowing got a little easier and a little more like disappearing. There was one detail I cared about more than the rest. My great-aunt Ruth, my mother's younger sister, is 79 and uses a walker, and she gets tired in loud rooms. I wanted a small quiet table near the fireplace where she and the older relatives could sit, out of the crush, close enough to hear the toasts. It was a simple thing. It was, in a way, the whole reason I like throwing parties, the chance to make a room where nobody feels like a burden. I brought it up to Camille while we were finalizing the layout. She barely looked up from arranging a centerpiece for a photo. "We're not wasting the fireplace on the old people, Liv," she said. "That's the best light in the room. That's where the family table goes." I said Aunt Ruth was family. Camille gave me a look I'd seen my entire life, patient and pitying, the look you give a child who doesn't understand how the world works. "Real family comes first," she said, and she went back to her centerpiece. "Real family comes first." I turned the phrase over in my hands like a stone. In Camille's mouth, it didn't mean love, it meant hierarchy. It meant there was an inner circle and an outer one, and the people who did the quiet work of holding everyone up belonged in the outer one, right next to the old and the inconvenient. It meant that family was a photograph, and some of us were meant to be in it, and some of us were meant to be holding the camera. I gave Aunt Ruth the fireplace table anyway, on the final layout, in pencil. I should have known Camille would bring an eraser. You might be wondering why I didn't just say something, why I didn't plant my feet and demand credit, or split the costs, or tell my mother exactly what her 40-year party was costing her overlooked daughter. I want you to know I tried, once, years ago. It was a smaller thing, a holiday I'd hosted and paid for, and afterward I gently asked if we could share the expense going forward, or at least take turns. I wasn't angry. I brought numbers, because numbers are safe. My mother's face changed like weather. She put a hand to her chest and said she felt her heart racing, that she couldn't believe I was keeping score, that after everything she'd done raising me, I would nickel and dime her at her own table. Within an hour, Camille had called to tell me I'd upset Mom so badly she'd had to lie down, and did I really need to make everything about money? By the end of the day, I was the villain. I had learned the price of asking, and the price was too high. So I stopped asking. I want to be clear because I know how it looks from outside. I saw the pattern. I wasn't blind to it. I set the boundary, and the boundary got turned into evidence of my cruelty, and the whole family closed ranks against me until I took it back, just to make the ache stop. That's not stupidity. That's a system, and it's designed so that the person who names it loses. So this year, I didn't ask. I just paid. I told myself that was maturity, choosing peace over pride. But peace you buy every year isn't peace. It's a receipt. And receipts, I would soon remember, can be cancelled. 2 weeks out, the budget I'd built so carefully started to buckle under Camille's additions. She wanted a champagne tower because it would photograph beautifully. She wanted upgraded flowers, taller, more dramatic. She wanted a second bar. Every idea arrived as an announcement, never a question, and every announcement landed on my card. I called Alderwood to adjust the order, and that's when I first spoke to the manager, Daniel. He was calm and precise in a way I recognized, the manner of a person who lives inside the details. He confirmed the deposit, the balance, the card on file. Just so you're aware, Ms. Doyle, he said, for a private event of this size, we keep the reserving party's card on file and run the final balance at the close of the evening, unless you instruct us otherwise. I told him that was fine. I was the reserving party. I was always the reserving party. I hung up and looked at the running total, and it had climbed past a number I would have found frightening if I'd let myself feel it. I didn't let myself. I moved money between accounts the way I always did, quietly, competently, carrying the difference. Camille posted a photo of a champagne coupe that day with the caption, "Putting together something magical for the people who made me, the people who made her." Not a word about the person paying for the magic. I stared at that post for a long time, and I felt the old wrestling match begin in my chest, the part of me that wanted to correct the record and the older, stronger part that had been trained since age 9 to swallow it and smile. The swallowing was winning, but it was getting harder to breathe around. The post that finally reached me went up on a Sunday. Camille had written a whole caption, long and loving, over a black and white photo of our parents from decades ago. "Planning Mom and Dad's 40th has been a labor of love," it read. "Every detail, every flower, every candle, chosen with my whole heart. This is what family means to me." Underneath, the comments bloomed. "What a wonderful daughter. Your parents are so lucky. The apple doesn't fall far." 60-some people telling my sister she was a saint for work she hadn't done, money she hadn't spent, a party she had only made more expensive. And there, in the tagged photos, was me, listed like a guest. Not the host, a guest at the event I was funding. I sat on my couch and read every comment twice, and I felt something I didn't have a clean word for. It wasn't quite anger. Anger would have been easier. It was closer to grief, the specific grief of watching someone accept thanks that were addressed to you, and realizing the mistake was never going to be corrected because everyone preferred the version where Camille was wonderful. My mother had commented too. "My girl, so proud of you." My girl. I read that one more than twice. My phone was in my hand. I could have typed the truth right there, calm and factual, the way I reconcile a ledger. I even started. My thumbs found the words. And then I thought about my mother's hand on her chest, about being the villain again, about ruining my parents' anniversary with the ugliness of the truth. So I deleted it. I put the phone face down on the cushion and I sat in the quiet, funding a labor of love that belonged, on paper and in every heart in that comment section, to somebody else. I almost said something a dozen times that week. I'd draft a message to Camille, reasonable and warm, asking her to maybe mention that I'd helped. Just a little, just so the family knew. Then I'd imagine her reply. "You're making this about you. It's Mom and Dad's day. Why do you always need credit?" And I'd delete it, because she wasn't entirely wrong, was she? It was Mom and Dad's day. Wanting to be named did feel, when I held it up in the bad light, Camille always seemed to shine on me, a little like greed. "Don't be greedy, Olivia. You didn't pay for that." The old law, still doing its work 25 years later, still translating my most basic wish, to be acknowledged, into a character flaw. So I kept the peace. And here is the thing I understand now that I didn't understand then. Keeping the peace was never free. I was paying for it, the same way I paid for everything, in a currency nobody could see. Every swallowed sentence was a withdrawal from an account I didn't know I had, the account where a person keeps her sense of being real. I had been overdrawn for years. I just hadn't looked at the balance, because I was a bookkeeper who wouldn't open her own account. And some accounts, once you finally open them, show you a number that changes your whole life. I wasn't ready to look yet. But the party was coming, and some ledgers don't let you keep them closed. Some ledgers walk right up to you at a buffet table in front of everyone you know and demand to be read out loud. Mine had 2 weeks left. I spent them the way I spent everything, quietly, carefully, paying. The only person who seemed to see me clearly that whole month was 12 years old. Hannah came with Camille to drop off some decorations at my office, and while her mother took a call in the hallway, Hannah lingered by my desk, looking at the binder where I kept the plans. She has her grandmother's dark eyes and none of her sharpness. "Aunt Liv," she said, in the careful way kids ask the questions adults have agreed not to ask. "How come you do all the work but Mom posts all the pictures?" I laughed. The reflexive laugh you use to make a hard question soft. "Oh, that's just how we split it up, sweetheart," I said. "Your mom's good at the pretty parts. I'm good at the boring parts." Hannah didn't laugh. She looked at the binder, at the spreadsheets and the receipts, and the seating chart in my handwriting, and then she looked at me with an expression far too old for her face. "The boring parts are the real ones," she said. Then Camille's voice came from the hallway, and Hannah went quiet again, the way she always did around her mother, folding herself smaller. But she'd said it. The boring parts are the real ones. A 12-year-old had looked at my family for 30 seconds and understood something the adults had spent decades refusing to. I thought about that all the way home. I thought about what it does to a child to grow up watching one woman get thanked for another woman's love. I thought about which lesson Hannah was learning, and from whom, and whether anyone was going to teach her a different one. I didn't know it yet, but that question, more than my own pride, was going to decide what I did at that party. Let me tell you about the dress now, because it matters more than it should. 3 days before the party, I went to a boutique I'd walked past for years and never entered, the kind of place where a saleswoman brings you water and doesn't hover. I hadn't bought myself something beautiful since I couldn't remember when. I always found a reason. Too expensive, too impractical, save it for someone who'll actually be looked at. But I walked in that day with a strange, steady purpose, and I asked for something red. Not burgundy, not a tasteful wine. Red, the color you cannot miss, the color that refuses to apologize. The saleswoman brought me 3, and the second one fit like it had been waiting for me. I stood in front of the mirror in that red dress and I almost didn't recognize the woman looking back. She looked like someone who took up space on purpose. She looked like someone who might, for once, fill her own plate. I bought it without checking the price, which for me was practically a revolution, and I carried it home in its long bag like something alive. That night, I hung it on my closet door and I stood in front of it and I practiced. Not a speech. I didn't want a scene. I just practiced saying, out loud, to an empty room, "Thank you all for coming." The kind of simple thing a host is allowed to say. I wanted to be able to stand at the front of that room and say them and mean them and be, for one evening, visible. Red, because for once I wanted to be impossible to overlook. I didn't know, hanging that dress on the door, that it would become the only thing anyone remembered about that night, the woman in the red dress. That's what he called me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 2 days before the party, we did a walkthrough at Alderwood, and that's where Camille found my pencil marks and brought her eraser. Daniel led us into the Hearthstone room to confirm the layout, and it was beautiful, exactly as I'd imagined it. The fireplace warm, the long table draped in cream, the smaller table tucked cozily beside the hearth for Aunt Ruth and the older relatives. Camille walked in, took one look, and shook her head. No, this is all wrong," she said. She picked up the printed layout and started rearranging it out loud, moving the main table into the fireplace light, pushing the small table back toward the service door, near the kitchen, where the noise was. "The family table goes here, in the good light," she said. "Mom and Dad, me and the kids, front and center." I asked where I would be sitting. Camille consulted the chart she was inventing in real time. "You can float," she said, generous as a queen. "You're so good at making sure everyone's taken care of. You don't really need a seat." You don't really need a seat. At the party I was paying for. My mother, who had come along, nodded at Camille's arrangement like it was gospel. "That's perfect, Camille. You have such an eye." Daniel, standing quietly by the door, caught my expression for just a second, and something in his face registered it, the professional discretion of a man who has watched a lot of families reveal themselves in his dining rooms. He said nothing, Neither did I. I let Camille draw her chart, with my parents and my sister glowing in the firelight, and the old people by the kitchen door, and me nowhere at all. I had booked a room where I did not have a chair. That night, I finally did the thing a bookkeeper is never supposed to avoid. I opened the account I'd kept closed. I sat down at my kitchen table and I added it all up. Not just the party, but the years. The holidays I'd hosted, the repairs I'd covered, the trips I'd floated, the gifts I'd bought and let my parents present as their own, the 1,000 quiet subsidies that had kept my family comfortable and my sister shining. I put it all in one column, and I made myself look at the total. I won't tell you the number. It's enough to say it was the price of a house. I had, over a decade, quietly paid for a house, and I did not own a single room in my own family. I sat with that. I didn't cry, and I didn't rage. I just looked at it. The way I look at any account that's finally been reconciled, and I understood something with the cold clarity of arithmetic. I had been trying to buy something that isn't for sale. You cannot purchase a place at a table. You cannot fund your way into being loved. Every dollar I'd spent trying to earn my seat had only taught them that my seat was optional, because look, the party goes on fine whether I sit down or not. I could balance anyone's books but my own worth. I'd priced myself at 0 and then been furious that the family agreed. The party was in 2 days. I still intended to go. I still intended to smile, to make it beautiful, to give my parents their evening. But something had shifted in me, quiet and structural, the way a foundation shifts. I had finally opened the account, and you cannot unsee a number once you've read it. The day before the party, Aunt Ruth called me. She's the only one in the family who ever calls just to talk, and her voice is thin now but her mind is a blade. "Olivia," she said, "I want to tell you something, and I want you to actually hear it." I said I was listening. "Your mother has spent her whole life arranging the room so Camille catches the light," she said. "She did it to me, once, with our own mother. There's always a daughter who holds the tray, and a daughter who gets photographed holding it. I held the tray for 40 years, honey. I know the ache in your back." I sat down. I hadn't known that about her. "Here's my warning," Ruth went on. "They've gotten so used to you carrying everything that they've stopped seeing you carry it. And a family that stops seeing you will always, sooner or later, do their sums wrong. They'll forget to count you, and then one day they'll be very surprised to learn what you were worth." Do their sums wrong? I asked her what she meant exactly. She just laughed, softly, a little sadly. "You'll know it when it happens," she said. "And when it does, Olivia, don't you dare pick the tray back up. Set it down and let them hear it hit the floor." I didn't fully understand her then. I thought she was speaking in the general way old women speak, in proverbs and warnings. I didn't know she was describing, almost exactly, what was going to happen the following night, in a room lit by candles I had paid for, when my mother would open her mouth and do her sums so wrong that the whole family would finally, at last, be forced to count. The night of the party, the hearthstone room looked like something out of the fantasy I'd built in my kitchen. Candlelight moved on the walls. The flowers my mother would never admit she loved stood tall on every table. The fireplace glowed, and the long table gleamed with the cream linen and the good china, and the whole room smelled like the roast my father had loved for 40 years. It was, without exaggeration, perfect, and every single piece of it existed because I had chosen it and paid for it. I arrived early in my red dress. I checked the place settings, confirmed the timing with the kitchen, tipped the coat girl, and made sure Aunt Ruth's walker had a clear path, even though her table had been banished near the service door. Then the guests began to arrive, and Camille arrived with them, radiant in silver, positioning herself at the door like the hostess she had decided to be. "Welcome, welcome," she sang to my parents' friends, accepting their compliments on the beautiful room. "Isn't it gorgeous? We wanted everything perfect for Mom and Dad." We. She stood in a room she hadn't paid for, greeting guests I had fed, taking credit in real time, an inch from my face, and she did it so smoothly that not one person questioned it. Why would they? She looked the part. I stood off to the side in my impossible-to-overlook red dress, and I watched the party I had built receive its hostess, and it wasn't me. For one more hour, I told myself it didn't matter. The room was beautiful. My parents were happy. Wasn't that the whole point? I almost believed it. Then my mother arrived, and the evening began its turn toward the thing I would never be able to take back. The toasts came before dinner, while the champagne Camille had insisted on was still cold. My father stood first, sweet and brief, thanking everyone for coming. Then Camille rose, tapping her glass with a manicured nail, and the room turned to her like flowers to the sun. She was good. I'll give her that. She told a story about our parents' wedding photo. She got a laugh, she got a tear. And then she said the thing. When I decided to throw this party for Mom and Dad, she began, and my stomach dropped through the floor. I wanted every detail to say how much they mean to us, so I planned all of it. Every flower, every candle, this beautiful room, because that's what you do for the people who made you who you are. Applause. Warm, genuine applause, 60 people clapping for my sister's love. My mother pressed her hand to her heart, eyes shining, and said, loud enough to carry, Camille always takes care of this family. She always has. My father nodded. Our Camille. What would we do without her? I stood at the edge of the firelight in my red dress and I watched my entire family and all their friends thank the wrong daughter, out loud, in the room I had paid for, and I felt the last soft part of me go very still. Not one person looked at me, not one person said my name. I had built the whole evening as an offering, hoping that this year they would finally see me, and instead, I got to stand in the shadows and watch them hand my sister the credit like a crown. Hannah, seated at the family table in the good light, was not clapping. She was looking at me, and her face was the only true thing in that room. Dinner was announced, and the guests moved toward the long buffet I had designed, the roast and the sides and the lemon cake waiting at the end. I hadn't eaten all day. I'd been too busy making sure everyone else could. So I picked up a plate, an ordinary white plate, and I stepped into the line like any person at a party, and I reached for the food I had bought. That's when my mother's voice cut across the room. Olivia. Sharp, carrying, the voice she'd used on me since I was 9. Heads turned. She was looking at my plate with an expression of mild distaste, as if I'd reached for something that wasn't mine. Don't fill your plate, she said, and she smiled the thin smile that had ruled my whole life. You didn't pay for this. Let the guests go first. The room went quiet in that terrible dinner party way, where everyone hears and everyone pretends they didn't. A couple of Camille's friends laughed, small and uncertain. My mother turned back to her conversation, the matter settled, and Camille, beside her, smiled down at her own full plate and murmured, just loud enough, real family comes first, Liv. There it was, both of them, in the space of a minute. You didn't pay for this. Real family comes first, said to the woman whose card was, at that very moment, on file at the front desk, holding the entire evening. I stood in the buffet line with my empty white plate, and 25 years collapsed into a single point of perfect clarity. If only they knew who had paid for every bite in this room. But they didn't know. And in that silence, I understood that they were never, ever going to figure it out on their own. I was going to have to show them. What happened next took about 90 seconds, and it was the quietest 90 seconds of my life. I did not throw the plate, I did not cry, and I did not shout my mother's name across the room. I just stood there, holding the empty plate, and I let myself feel the whole weight of it at last, all of it. The corner piece at 9 and the seat I didn't get at 34, and the house-sized column of everything I'd paid to be treated like the help at my own event. And here is what surprised me. I did not feel small. For the first time in my life, standing there humiliated in front of everyone I knew, I did not feel small. I felt done. It's a different feeling entirely. Small is a thing that happens to you. Done is a thing you decide. I looked around the room, slowly, the way you take a final inventory. My father, not meeting my eyes. My mother, already laughing at something else. Camille, glowing at the head of the table in the light she'd stolen. And Aunt Ruth, way over by the service door, watching me with an expression that was almost a dare. Set it down and let them hear it hit the floor. I understood her now. Completely. I had spent my whole life trying to earn a place at a table by paying for the table, and the arithmetic had finally resolved into something so simple, I could have wept at how long it took me. You cannot buy what was never for sale, and you should stop trying. Tonight. Right now. In this dress. In front of everyone. I set the empty plate down on the edge of the buffet. Gently. I didn't need to slam it. I already knew what I was going to do. The math is simple, once you finally let yourself do it. For years I had run one equation over and over, hoping for a different answer. If I give more, I will be loved. If I pay more, I will belong. If I make myself useful enough, indispensable enough, they will finally see me and pull me into the light. And every year the equation returned the same result, the one I'd refused to accept. It doesn't balance. It never balanced. You cannot add your way to a seat at a table that has decided your staff. All those years I thought I was investing in a family. I was subsidizing a hierarchy, paying, every single time, for the privilege of being told I didn't count. Standing there in the candlelight, I did the one calculation I had never allowed myself. I asked what would happen if I simply stopped. Not screamed. Not exposed. Not made a scene worthy of Camille's dramatics. Just stopped. Stopped carrying the tray. Stopped covering the difference. Stopped funding the beautiful lie that my sister loved this family more than the woman quietly bankrupting herself to hold it together. The answer arrived clean and quiet and absolute. If I stopped, the whole thing would have to stand on its own. And it couldn't. Because it never had. I had a card on file at the front desk. I had a manager named Daniel who had told me, precisely, that the reserving party could instruct him otherwise. I had a phone in the small red purse that matched my impossible dress. And I had, for the first time in 34 years, absolutely nothing left to prove. I glanced once more at Hannah. She was still watching. I decided, right then, what I wanted her to see. I turned toward the door. Camille caught me before I reached the coat rack. She'd seen something change in my face, and my sister has a predator's instinct for the exact moment her control might slip. She crossed the room fast and took my elbow, steering me toward the wall, lowering her voice to the sweet, urgent register she uses when she's afraid of a scene. "Don't," she said, smiling for the room while her eyes drilled into me. "Whatever you're thinking, Olivia, don't. Not tonight. This is Mom and Dad's night. Don't you dare make it about you." And for just 1 second, one flickering second, I saw it. Her hand on my elbow was trembling. My poised, glittering sister, who had never in her life picked up a tray, was frightened. Because some animal part of her understood that the whole beautiful structure she stood on top of was held up by me, and that I had just, somewhere behind my calm eyes, decided to stop holding it. She was terrified of being the woman who couldn't pay. She had spent her whole life performing perfection because in our family, the alternative was to become me, and she would rather have died. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I'm not going to make a scene, Camille," I said. And I meant it, and I watched the reassurance land on her face just before I finished the sentence. "I'm just going to go home." Her grip loosened with relief. She thought she'd won. She thought I was doing what I always did. Folding, disappearing, keeping the peace. She let go of my elbow and turned back to her guests with a hostess's smile. Over her shoulder, at the family table, Hannah was watching to learn what a woman does when she is told, in front of everyone, that she doesn't count. So I showed her. I walked to the coat rack at the back of the room, unhurried, and I took down my coat. My hands were steady. That surprised me most of all, how steady my hands were, after a lifetime of shaking whenever I got close to wanting something. I put the coat on over the red dress, and I took my phone out of my little red purse. This was the moment. I want to be honest about it, because it was not a moment of triumph. It was a choice, and it had a price. And I paid the price with my eyes open. I could have done what I had always done. I could have swallowed it one more time, driven home, cried in the parking lot, and been back next year with a bigger deposit and a smaller heart, still hoping. That path was right there, warm and familiar, and it led to a seat at the table for as long as I kept paying rent on it in pieces of myself. Or I could stop. And stopping meant losing the only family I had, the fantasy of them, the version where if I just gave enough, they would someday love me the way I loved them. Stopping meant admitting that the corner piece was never coming. Not at 9, not at 34, not ever. Standing at that coat rack, I chose to lose the fantasy and keep the woman. I found the number for Alderwood in my phone, and I stepped just outside the door into the quiet hallway, and I asked to speak to Daniel. He came on in a moment, calm as ever. "Ms. Doyle," I told him, in the level voice I use for numbers, that I wanted to remove my card from the reservation and that I would not be covering the balance for the evening. He paused, only for a breath, the pause of a professional confirming he'd heard correctly. "You're the reserving party," he said. "That's entirely your right. Shall I present the outstanding balance to the party or hold it at the desk?" I looked back through the doorway at the candlelit room, at my mother laughing, at my sister glowing, at the long table where I had never had a chair. "Present it to them," I said. "To my mother and my sister." At the head table. "And Daniel? Tell them who canceled it." Then I buttoned my coat, and I walked out into the cold, and for the first time in my life, I did not look back to see if they wanted me to stay. I didn't see what happened next. I heard about it later, in pieces, from Aunt Ruth, and eventually, from Hannah, and the pieces all agree. A few minutes after I left, while the champagne was still being poured and Camille was still holding court, Daniel came into the Hearthstone room carrying a black leather folder. He walked, unhurried and correct, straight to the head of the table where my mother and my sister sat in the fireplace light. He set the folder down in front of them, the way a good manager does, quiet and without drama. My mother looked up, still smiling, expecting a compliment or a question about dessert. "What's this?" she asked. And Daniel said, in the even voice of a man simply relaying a fact, "The woman in the red dress canceled the reservation payment and asked me to hand this to you." He opened the folder. Inside was the full balance for the evening, every plate, every flower, every glass of the champagne Camille had insisted on, printed in a long, clean column with a total at the bottom that matched the price of the fantasy they'd been living in. For a moment, nobody moved. Then my mother's face, by every account, drained of all its color. Camille reached for the folder, read the number, and went white to the lips. 60 guests, still holding their full plates, watched the two women who had spent the whole evening being thanked realize, in real time, exactly who had paid for every bite in the room, and that she had just put on her coat and left. The woman in the red dress. That's how Daniel said it. And that's how the whole family would tell it forever after. Not Olivia. Not the reliable one. The woman in the red dress who finally stopped paying. I was in the parking lot when it happened, sitting in my car, and my hands still weren't shaking. I noticed that with a kind of wonder. For 34 years my hands had trembled whenever I dared to want, and now, having wanted the biggest thing of all, my own dignity, they were perfectly still. The phone lit up almost at once, my mother calling. I let it ring. Then Camille, a text. All capitals. "How could you humiliate us like this?" I read it and set the phone face down on the passenger seat. Humiliate them. As if I had stood up and made a speech. As if I had thrown wine. As if I had done any of the loud dramatic things Camille herself would have done. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't said one cruel word. All I had done was decline to keep paying for a room that had no chair for me, and to them that felt like violence, because they had never once imagined that the money might stop. I sat there in the cold and I waited to feel guilty. I really did. I waited for the old chest-tightening shame, the villain feeling, the certainty that I'd gone too far and had to fix it. It didn't come. What came instead was something I hadn't felt since before I was 9 years old. Room. Space in my own chest to breathe. I hadn't beaten them at their own game. I hadn't out-schemed Camille or exposed her with some clever trap. I had simply stopped subsidizing a story that made me disappear, and the story had collapsed on its own the second I stepped out from under it. The phone buzzed again on the seat. I almost ignored it, but this one wasn't from my mother, and it wasn't from Camille. I'll tell you about that message in a moment, because it turned out to matter more than all the others combined. But first, sitting in that dark parking lot, I finally understood the thing my whole life had been circling. For 34 years, I had believed my problem was that I didn't give enough. That if I just paid a little more, carried a little more, made myself a little more essential, the love would arrive and the account would clear. I had the equation exactly backwards. I had paid for all of it. That was the problem. The paying was never the solution to being overlooked. The paying was the reason I was overlooked. Every dollar I spent trying to earn my place had taught them, more surely than any words, that my place could be bought, and therefore that my place was cheap, and therefore that I was staff. Love isn't a balance you settle. It isn't a debt you can be current on. It is the one thing in the whole world that refuses to be purchased, and I had spent a decade and the price of a house trying to buy it, and going broke in every way that isn't money. My mother had said I didn't pay for the party. She had it exactly wrong and exactly right. I had paid for the party and the flowers and the roast and every anniversary before it and the holidays and the repairs and the peace. I had paid for all of it. And the day I finally stopped was the first day I could actually be at the table, because a person who has stopped buying her seat is the only person in the room who is truly free to sit down. I picked up the phone. The message was from Hannah. The fallout was real, and I won't pretend it was clean. In the days after, the family split into the two camps such things always split into. My mother didn't call to apologize. She called to tell me I had ruined her anniversary and embarrassed her in front of her friends, and that she hoped I was proud of myself. My father sent a single text saying he wished I hadn't. Camille and my mother ended up splitting the balance between them at the desk that night because someone had to, and for the first time in her life, my sister had to reach into her own purse to pay for the family image she loved to perform. Aunt Ruth told me later that Camille's face when she signed the slip was something she'd remember to her grave, the pure disbelief of a woman discovering that the magic had always had a bill attached, and that it had always, quietly, been paid by someone else. I don't say that to gloat. There was no gloating in me. If anything, I felt a strange tenderness toward my sister in that moment, because I finally understood her fear. She had spent her whole life terrified of becoming the one who pays, and now, for one night, she was. The family that made us both was never going to change. My mother would go on arranging the light around Camille until the day she died, but I had stopped standing in the shadow to hold the lamp. I had set the tray down, and I had heard it hit the floor. The message in the parking lot, the one that wasn't from my mother or my sister, was from Hannah. She must have slipped away from the table and typed it in a bathroom, a 12-year-old with her grandmother's dark eyes and none of her cruelty. "Aunt Liv," it read, "you looked really brave tonight. I'm sorry Grandma said that. The boring parts really are the real ones." I sat in my car and read it 3 times, and that was the moment. Not the coat, not the folder, not the color leaving my mother's face, that told me I had done the right thing. Because Hannah had been at that table her whole short life learning the family arithmetic, learning which daughter gets photographed and which daughter holds the tray, and tonight she had watched a different lesson. She had watched the tray holder decide she was a person. I wrote back carefully, choosing words I hoped she'd keep. "Thank you, sweetheart. Remember something for me. You never have to pay to be loved. Not ever. Anyone who makes you buy your seat was never really offering you one. She sent back a single small heart. It was worth more than everything I'd spent. I closed the family books after that. Not with a slammed door, not with a dramatic letter, just quietly, the way you close an account that's finally been reconciled. When the calls came asking me to handle the next thing, cover the next cost, fix the next problem, I said no, gently, and I let the silence that followed be their problem instead of mine. Some of them are still angry. Some of them, I think, are a little relieved, though they'd never say so. Aunt Ruth calls every Sunday, and Hannah texts me pictures of her drawings. That's my family now, the ones who see the boring, real parts. A week after the party, I did something small. I cooked myself dinner, a good one, and I set the table with the nice plates, and I put on the red dress just to sit in my own kitchen. And I filled my plate, all the way. I sat down alone in that impossible red dress, in a room I paid for and a life I finally owned, and for the first time I did not feel one flicker of guilt. Here's what I know now, and I wish someone had told the 9-year-old holding her empty plate. Real family doesn't come first by taking the biggest slice. It comes first by making sure everyone gets to fill their own. My mother told me I didn't pay for that party. The truth is, I had paid for all of it, for years, in money and silence and pieces of myself. And the day I finally stopped paying was the day I finally, for the first time in my life, had a seat. That's my story. One red dress. One plate I set down. One bill I finally handed back to the people who swore I hadn't paid it. If you've been the reliable one so long you forgot you were ever allowed to be a guest, take this as your sign. Stop paying rent on a seat that should have been yours all along. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.